Escape the media storm with The Week magazine. Curated from over 200 independent sources, The Week gives you the clarity and space to step away from the noise of the media and enjoy a refreshingly balanced view of the news. Take advantage of our spring sale offer and try 6 free issues with complimentary digital access included. Visit theweek.co.uk/offer and enter the promo code SPRING to redeem. That's promo code SPRING at theweek.co.uk/offer. Offer ends 6th of April.
Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
It's the week ending Saturday, the 25th of March, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen President Putin welcoming Xi Jinping to Moscow, the Casey Review finding racist, homophobic and misogynistic culture within the Met Police, and Rishi Sunak publishing his tax return revealing income of more than £4.7 million over 3 years. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from The Week magazine is assistant editor Leaf Arbuthnot. From the refugee podcast Integrate That, it's Abdulwahab Tahhan. And from the Chinese Whispers podcast, it's assistant editor of The Spectator, Cindy Yu. Star of Good Morning Britain, Cindy. I saw you the other day, nearly spat out my cornflakes.
Should I call out to you next time, Ollie?
Please. How was it? Did you spend a lot of time in makeup? That's my experience of doing breakfast TV.
Yeah, they're really good with makeup, actually. And I enjoy having a nice natter with the makeup ladies before you go on.
Well, it was very exciting to see you. Leaf, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Why it's not great to be born in Glasgow.
Hey guys, I've brought you here to another place in Glasgow to show you. It's the Glasgow Necropolis. It's a graveyard. It's a graveyard. It's a huge graveyard. It can be seen from anywhere in Glasgow, and from it you can see anywhere in Glasgow. I know it's a bit morbid bringing you to a graveyard, but there's something about coming to a graveyard, especially one like this, the Glasgow Necropolis, one of the biggest graveyards in the world.
The distinctive tones of comedian Limmy there in his video, Glasgow Necropolis, City of the Dead. You can watch the whole thing on YouTube. Leaf, why are the Glaswegian graveyards relevant to this week's news?
Well, it's a bit of a morbid way to talk about the story, I admit, but I think it's an unusual way in. A campaign group called Health Equals has analysed data from the Office for National Statistics, and its analysis has revealed some really startling regional disparities in life expectancy in the UK. And it means that if you're born in Hampstead, which is the place in the UK which has the greatest life expectancy, you can hope to live to 88. But if you're born in Glasgow, you have a life expectancy of 76. And the report has revealed that 15 of the 20 parliamentary constituencies that have the highest life expectancies are in London and in the southeast, and that 17 of the 20 constituencies with the lowest life expectancy are in Scotland, and 7 of those are in Glasgow. In fact, the 7 constituencies in Glasgow fill the 7 worst spots for life expectancy.
Yeah, so there's a divide between England and Scotland, Abdul, but, within England as well, the lowest life expectancy in England at 78 is Blackpool, followed by Bradford West. So this is actually just straightforwardly about poverty, isn't it?
Well, a lot of refugees don't know about that, right? That's why they still come here. And we tell them always refugees are welcome. I was one of them. I was so happy to be here, regardless of the life expectancy. When I was researching this, when I looked at the poverty and looked at the life expectancy and how it's related to poverty, and then I thought about the proverb says that money doesn't buy happiness. And actually it does. A couple of scientists discovered that after economists and psychologists, that money actually buys happiness. And if money buys happiness, then you can kind of prolong your life a little bit. And they found out that money is related to happiness, that if you make more than 75,000 US dollars a year, then you're kind of a little bit more happier than if you make less than that. That was in 2010. In 2021, 2 years ago, they just found that no, it's actually if you make over 200,000, you're happier. You're happier, you live longer, unless, of course, there are things that you cannot really deal with, like diseases or things that are out of your control that money cannot actually control. So yes, poverty makes life expectancy low. Wealth, as we can see from the royal family, makes life expectancy very, very high.
I'm not sure I necessarily tie the royal family in with happiness right now, but I see your point. I mean, I suppose where there is a straightforward correlation, Cindy, is in, for example, health and the ability to purchase nutritious food. I mean, it's sort of a bit of fun, isn't it, when you go and visit Glasgow to have a deep fried, whatever, Mars bar or macaroni cheese pie. But actually, if that is representative of a diet, that is problematic. I mean, it could be one of the things that's underlying this sort of health divide.
I work in an office with a lot of Scots, and I have it on their authority that a fryer is a must-have for a Scottish kitchen in a way that a rice cooker might be for a Chinese kitchen. So that was a surprise to me. But yeah, I think you're right, Ollie. I mean, nutrition is such a massive part of it. And this also links into the obesity crisis that the UK has as well, which is definitely poverty linked too, where in the poorer areas, child obesity is much more a problem because I mean, A, you're not taught how to cook nutritiously. And sometimes even when vegetables are cheaper or whatever it is, you don't know how to prepare it. And also B, parents and families are time poor in some of these areas and don't have the ability to provide for their children in the best way that middle class or upper middle class parents can. And I think that's only just part of it. I mean, like Leaf's story is so interesting because so much of health involves everything else around you. So food is one thing, but also just the amount of greenery that you have around you, how fresh your air is, how easily it is to get to work, whether or not if you get injured at work or whatever it is, how easily it is to see a good hospital, private or NHS healthcare, all of these things. And I think we're now becoming more mindful that health isn't just about whether or not you're ill at that moment, but about like a more of a lifetime thing. And all of these different parts of your lifestyle contribute so much. And then in the end, they come up in the life expectancy figures.
Except, Leaf, if you look at Scotland, there are a lot of places in Scotland where there are more social services available for free than there are in England. There's certainly plenty of green space. It's not as straightforward, is it? It's just saying it's about the infrastructure.
No, I don't think it's necessarily all about the infrastructure. If you're living in the Lake District, for instance, you have all this, green, sort of beautiful rolling countryside around you, and yet you might be also extremely poor. This organization, Health Equals, which is a coalition of organizations, really, it wants more than just, change it to infrastructure. It wants the government to really prioritize, reducing the life expectancy gap. And the government has said that, that it's made lots of noises about how it wants to get life expectancy generally up, but it's got quite unrealistic goals. And it just strikes me as life expectancy is one of those things that sort of takes the temperature generally of how a country is doing. And so it kind of comes right at the end of, you can't just sort of put into place one life expectancy policy and expect to see results. It sort of floats above policy. So it's one of those things that's extremely difficult to tackle. You can't just have a sort of, Secretary of State for life expectancy, because it's really the sort of sum total of all that a government and a succession of governments is doing.
I suppose it speaks to the aspiration of the individual as well, and whether that's possible, Abdul. I mean, you were talking about, being a refugee. If you're coming from a country where you fear for your life and you end up in England, you're not going to think, which city am I, more likely to have a heart attack in? You're going to think, I'm glad I'm not being pursued. I suppose there's got to be a feeling that you can be, with respect to people from Glasgow, just looking at this statistically, kind of effectively born in Glasgow but die in Hampstead, right? If it's possible for you to move out of your economic circumstances, then you feel some ownership. The problem is if you feel like there's nothing you can do about it.
If you feel that there's nothing to do about it, and if you look at these statistics in a kind of skeptic way, because if you're talking about the life expectancy now is 70 years something, so that takes us to 1950s. And in the 1950s, UK was ranked 7th in the world in life expectancy. And suddenly we just fell like a lot of levels in the ranking. So I think it would be interesting. I don't think we will live enough 70 years to see people who are born in 2023, how long they live. But quality of life is getting better. not only the quality of life in a lot of places, but also if you look at South Korea, for example. South Korea is, in the last 20 years, have grown the tallest by almost a half inch taller than the rest of the world. And that's because of a diet, that's because of how they live, and that's because of sport. Even if you live in Scotland, a lot of refugees go there. If you take care of yourself, if you have the means to take care of yourself and live a good life, a healthy life, you can still live long.
I mean, those things tie together, though, don't they, Cindy? Social mobility and what used to be called levelling up. I mean, how's that going at the moment, that project, from your perspective at The Spectator?
Well, this is also the week that Boris Johnson was pretty thoroughly defenestrated, I think, in the public's eye. On Wednesday, he had 3 hours of being questioned, and it was just completely unedifying to watch him go through that, I think probably for both sides. But also he tried to lead a very unsuccessful rebellion against Rishi Sunak's Brexit deal. So I think with Boris Johnson's premiership completely dying, with his leadership completely dying, I mean, the levelling up agenda is also kind of falling by the wayside. I mean, that's not to say that Rishi Sunak doesn't care about this kind of issues, but he's clearly valuing other things a bit more. So I think we're not going to really be hearing much about levelling up in British politics. That doesn't mean that these issues aren't here. And that doesn't mean that these issues haven't been here since before Boris Johnson mentioned them. So I'm loath to attach him too much to it. Something called population health, which is the idea that I was talking about just now, that all of these things contribute to a preventative way of looking at health, is something that a lot of people in the NHS are talking about at the moment. So there are lots of clever people thinking about how health links to socioeconomic standards. And I think that is a longer term trend. I just don't know if it will be in politics.
But turning your back on levelling up from a Conservative point of view is a mistake, isn't it, in terms of the seats they want to try and keep at the next election are the ones in those areas that need levelling up?
Yes, true. I think, but those seats are also the ones that tend to care more about the small boats crisis, for example. So I think for Rishi Sunak, keeping that constituency, it might become more of a priority once we get closer to the election. But for now, he thinks, I mean, he's got his 5 goals, right? And none of them are levelling up, but stopping small boats is something that he thinks will appeal to the red wall.
And, you know, we talked about our global positioning, Leaf. There, Abdul referenced where we are, 29th in the global chart of life expectancy. I was really amazed to read that we're now the second most economically unequal country in Europe after Bulgaria.
Yeah,
according to the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development.
Is that because of Rishi Sunak's family bringing up the gap significantly?
No doubt. Yes, so there's been this kind of quite august study into global life expectancy. And the researchers have found that the UK has slipped down the ranks worse than all other G7 countries, apart from the US, in the past 7 decades. And that's not because our life expectancy has, been dropping over the past 7 decades. It's actually been rising. It's because other countries, their life expectancy has been rising quicker than ours. So, for instance, places like South Korea have been doing extremely well. And according to this study, or reports of it, Hong Kong has the longest life expectancy, so 85.2 years. So Abdul, who's recording from Hong Kong, can expect to see many decades ahead. And then and other countries, that are doing very well include Norway, Switzerland, Singapore, the usual kind of heavy hitters on the life expectancy chart. This study was quite interesting because it found that life expectancy, it made a sort of link between inequality and life expectancy, and said that, for instance, in the 1980s, the UK became, and in the aftermath of the 1980s, obviously Thatcher, the UK became much more unequal. It's the performance of poor people's life expectancy statistics which are dragging the UK down. So the prosperous old are living ever longer in the UK, but the poor old are not. So, it's a reminder that life expectancy is a political issue as well as obviously a health one.
Okay. Abdul, you're up next after this.
Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
Okay, Abdul, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Do Palestinians exist?
No such thing as a Palestinian. There's no such thing as a Palestinian people. Do you know who's Palestinian? I am Palestinian. My late grandfather, who was 13th generation Jerusalemite, is the true Palestinian. The Palestinian people are an invention that is less than 100 years old.
Bezalel Smotrich, Israel's national security minister, talking at an event in Paris on Tuesday. Abdul, we heard the words he was saying there, albeit with a bastardized Northern English accent in Al Jazeera's translation, but saying there isn't such a thing as a Palestinian people. That's pretty stark language, however you say it.
I wasn't really surprised to hear that he denies the existence of Palestinians because he thinks that Palestinians don't exist because they never existed. And then by borrowing this definition, then we think that our prime minister is not really British, he's Indian because he came from India, his parents are Indian. So if you're gonna apply the same principle to people, then I am not British. I don't know about you, Cindy. I don't know about you, Leaf and Ollie, where you're from or where your parents are from. So this was ridiculous.
But
and to deny
the
people...
example you just gave gets even more complicated because according to his version, then Rishi Sunak would be British because India was colonially British. So let's not try and make too many comparisons here. I mean, when it comes to Israel in particular, who was he talking to? Like, it's weird because he's in France, but he's saying it in Hebrew. This is for his political audience back home, right?
This is a political audience in memory of a Jewish Zionist activist who died ages ago, and he was addressing kind of supporters of him in his memory. And he was saying that Palestinians don't exist. This is our land. And what was problematic is that the poster on the podium shows a map of Israel, including Jordan and the West Bank, which belongs to the Palestinian, under the occupied Palestinians Authority.
Which isn't part of Israel's official policy, is it? I mean, they certainly have not drawn a map like that for the prime minister to stand in front of.
It is not. And then the people in the Jordanian parliament got really angry and decided they wanted to expel the ambassador of Israel, and they voted to expel him. And now this decision is bending approval of King Abdullah to expel him. Of course, the Israel government said that we recognize the integrity of Jordan. Jordan is not part of Israel, and his views do not represent our views. So this was really problematic.
He's still in the cabinet.
He's still in the cabinet because he's a big supporter of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, especially during this 11-week turmoil that's happening in Israel, in what a lot of people call it the Israeli Intifada.
Yes, we'll get on to that in a second. I mean, just before I do, briefly, Abdul, obviously you're on top of a lot of Arabic language media. What's the general reaction been? I mean, beyond the obvious, what are people saying?
Beyond the obvious, people are not really shocked that much that such things are being said about Palestinians, because since 1948 or since 1920s, when the first settlers started coming to Palestine and buying the lands from Palestinians, a lot of them bought the lands legitimately, but some of them were kind of trying to use other ways to kick out the Palestinians and try to prevent them from going back. And preventing people from going back is kind of a big issue for Palestinians who left Palestine and still hold keys to their properties. And this has been documented in a lot of places. So to hear this now saying that, this guy saying that there are no Palestinians, we do not exist. So this is like, no, we exist, we're here. This has kind of recently been shared on social media and now by a government official. So that makes it official. What you're trying to do is kind of racist.
Okay, so that's the reaction in the Arab world, perhaps not unexpected to this sort of rhetoric, Cindy. But as Abdul referred to there, the reaction within Israel, not to this particular comment, but to the general political context there, is not exactly plain sailing at the moment either, is it? Fill us in on what's been going on there.
Right. So as Abdul mentioned, there's been 11 weeks of protests going on in Israel. And basically all of this comes from Netanyahu having had to keep his role as prime minister or win it back after he lost it in the last few years with a far-right coalition. So the way that Israeli politics works is that it's not first past post, which means that parties have to make coalitions all of the time. And the only way he could get in government this time was to make a deal with a lot of different far-right traditionalist groups, often with very extreme views on settlers or on Israeli nationhood, all that sort of stuff. And for them, they wanted to put in these judicial reviews that would, critics say, erode the impartiality of the justice system in Israel and therefore erodes how democratic Israel is, because the government would then be more in control. And so we've had weeks of protests, which have really been very rarely covered in the Western media, actually, but very, very important, including not just your classic, people, your usual suspects, but including military reservists. So people who are establishment types who are really angry about this. And I think it's fascinating. And I don't know enough about Israeli politics to know whether or not this means that Netanyahu would step down. You think that this is not an ideal situation, but maybe actually for him, this is a bright thing to be pushing forward in order to show his credentials. So it's fascinating times at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are extraordinary, aren't they, Leaf? You're seeing 100,000, I think in one protest, 250,000 Israelis out on the street protesting, and on weekdays too. So this isn't just, there was a series of weekend protests, but, when you're having a weekday protest in Jerusalem, that means you're not working. It means you're effectively on strike. Some people will have been forsaking their salary to go and protest. And as Cindy says, it's not just all the people you'd expect. It's clearly, with that number of people, it's everyone.
Absolutely. It's quite a small country, Israel. It doesn't have a massive population. So 100,000 people turning out, will represent a sort of significant proportion of the population in a way that it doesn't really, it wouldn't happen in the UK. It reminds me a bit of the protest in Hong Kong, which also dragged in a couple of years ago, also involved a significant proportion of the population. What I'm really interested in about this story about the kind of these judicial reforms is that Israel's future is really on the table. There are kind of two major different distinctions in Israeli societies: that sort of more sort of orthodox population, a lot of whom have, fairly traditional views and have lots of children and who are becoming ever more numerous. And then the sort of more, lefty liberal types. I've got quite a few friends who live in Israel and who will work at startups and like going out for, cocktails and have a lovely life. But there is a real contrast between these two kind of types of people, and both groups are crammed into a very small country, and the tensions seem to me fated to get ever more intense. So yes, okay, it seems a bit of a dry subject to an extent, because no one wants to talk about judicial reforms, but the question is whether Netanyahu and governments like his will be allowed in the years coming ahead to basically rule unchecked.
Which would bring, I suppose, Abdul, Israel in line, in a bad way, with other countries in the region, right? I mean, one of the things that Israel has in its favour is it is a democracy. They have voted for Benjamin Netanyahu in using their process. But the claim now is that he's trying to put something in place that would stop it being a democracy. And that's something that, right from the beginning of Zionism, was the point, right? You didn't have to be religious. You had to believe in having a democracy and having a homeland for the Jewish people in the Middle East.
Yeah, Israel is now being considered the only democracy in the Middle East. That's what's being considered by a lot of people. But what they're trying to do is that this is an elected government, elected officials, but they want to change kind of the democratic process and getting all the power from the courts. The three main things that they want to take away from the court is preventing the court from striking down legislations, and change how judges are selected, and allow simple majority to overtake the court ruling. So simply is saying that our word is law, and that is the really how authoritarian starts. So I don't think really Israel is looking around the other countries in the Middle East and saying, how can we catch up to them? The only thing that is different here and really gave me hope that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, a lot of them decided not to report to service due to this. That is the difference with what happened in the Arab Spring. In Syria, the army was killing the civilians, the people. In Egypt, when Sisi took over in the coup, the army was killing people. In pretty much every country where we started the Arab Spring, the army was killing. Here, the army decided, hey, these are our people. We're not going to kill our people. we're going to refuse service. So, which is really interesting to see in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I saw reports as well of some El Al pilots who wouldn't fly Netanyahu either on civilian aircraft. So, if you don't have that kind of voluntary involvement from the people, that's problematic. I suppose the other thing that's difficult for him, Cindy, is what this does to his relationship and Israel's relationship with the White House.
Yes, absolutely. The Americans have condemned these judicial review plans. They're obviously very concerned about the protests. But I think there's so much that's just systemic about the American stance towards Israel that a particular government or particular policy wouldn't change the fundamentals that much, by which I just mean because of this whole thing about it being the only democracy in the region and really very cooperative with America on other things, that the US will fundamentally support Israel in many of its formats. So I think it won't be a massive problem in that sense. And just on Abdul's previous point, I wonder if the military opposition to all of this compared to other countries is actually because so many Israelis are made to do military service themselves. So you almost become the type of person that the military attracts is not the type of person who wants to go to military, but everyone really, because all men in Israel have to go through this year of military service. And I think that wider participation just means that it's not a select group of people who might be attracted to that role for different reasons. So I wonder if that's a part of it as well. It's quite interesting to note this difference.
How do you see this playing out, Leaf? I mean, during Netanyahu's last election campaign, there was a lot of campaign talk about how can someone who's being investigated through the courts also be prime minister, but presto, he is.
Yeah.
But it's not a good look, is it? Can it really go on much longer?
Well, that's certainly right. And if the last few years are any kind of judge, then probably there'll be another election and more turmoil. It's quite interesting to see that through all the kind of the turmoil or through all of the drama that there has been in Israel in the past few years, the country is doing pretty well economically. It had a good pandemic relative to many other countries. So I'm sort of hopeful that for ordinary Israelis, they'll be able to kind of push forward with their lives. I mean, I think that if these protests continue as they are now, it's just not tenable for these reforms to go through unadulterated. But Netanyahu is a serious political operator, and he fights for his life. And if he can't really afford a loss of face on this, so I'm not going to make any predictions beyond this drama. It shows no sign of abating anytime soon.
Okay, Cindy, you're up next after this. Okay, Cindy, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This is the week that an important chapter in Scottish politics closes.
Last night, the SNP won an incredible 80% of seats in Scotland, an overwhelming endorsement of our campaign, message and vision. It is clear, beyond any doubt, that the kind of future desired by the majority in Scotland is very different to that chosen by much of the rest of the UK.
The glory days there. Nicola Sturgeon on the day of her biggest success, sweeping to victory again in 2019. But Cindy, this is the week we say goodbye to the longest serving First Minister of Scotland.
And the first female First Minister as well. I mean, she's been just such a giant in Scottish politics for so long, and to such an extent that I don't think any of her successors in the running at the moment could fill in those shoes. And yes, that clip was from 2019 when the SNP completely wiped out Labour and the Tories in Scotland. But how things changed so quickly. I mean, just 4 years later, Nicola Sturgeon is standing down, and actually polls are showing that the support for independence has never been so low since before 2014. And so really interesting to note what Nicola Sturgeon's legacy is, if she can't say that she's handing on this baton to someone else who can make the case for independence as well as she and Alex Salmond before her did.
Which might be why, when she held her final cabinet meeting on Wednesday, she told her team that, quote, lots of really important things had been achieved. Because you can't really make the case for, and we're ever closer to independence, using the current stats, can you? But what are those other things, do you think, Cindy, that she can actually point to?
So The Spectator has put together some graphs on this, and you can see this on the Spectator website about Nicola Sturgeon's domestic legacy and just leaving independence aside. And actually, it's not looking great. So as Leaf mentioned, life expectancy at the very beginning. And actually, life expectancy for Scottish women and men have fallen in the last few years in the fastest rate in 4 decades. Drug deaths have continued to increase under her government. The poverty attainment gap, the attainment gap between the poorer students and the richer students, remains as wide as it ever was. And the NHS is not doing well. I mean, the NHS is not doing well anywhere in the UK, so bearing that in mind. But so the domestic legacy on health, on education, on life expectancy is not a rosy picture. And actually, Nicola Sturgeon, I think, so often did so well on making the case for independence very, very fluently that it was easy to overlook these other domestic issues that just weren't getting solved. And I think eventually that was also why some people were starting to get fed up with her.
What do you think, Leaf, her legacy will be?
I think there's a sort of brute legacy, which is to me a positive one, about seeing a woman do so well for so long in UK politics. I think no one can take that away from her.
Basically, after Thatcher, really, the most significant woman in British politics in my lifetime.
Yeah.
What are you saying about Liz Truss?
But bouncing off what Cindy said, I was looking at some polls on how Scots think that she's done, and 60% of them say that she spent far too much time on the issue of independence over the past 8 years. And even 20% of sort of SNP voters, when they were asked what her greatest achievement was, this was quite soon after she had announced her resignation, Scott said that her greatest achievement was the pandemic, her handling with the pandemic, and that was far and away judged to be her greatest achievement. And then there was the introduction of baby boxes, which are sort of given to mothers to help them through the first few months of becoming mothers. So it doesn't seem to me that the Scots really think that she's got very much to show for her 8 years in office. But there's also obviously big problems with the succession. Can you really be a successful leader, as Cindy says, if there are no people that seem to have been groomed for high office that could, do as good a job as you? I suppose it's an open question.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's where it packages in with her charisma and her status on the world stage, Abdul, doesn't it? I mean, most people internationally, I presume, have no idea who the First Minister of Scotland is, but if they ever knew, it's Nicola Sturgeon. They wouldn't remember any of her predecessors, and they certainly won't care who's going to be the next leader of the SNP. She cut above all of that, but it does make a problem for finding the next one.
That's absolutely correct. But before she was the First Minister, nobody knew who she was, or maybe outside the UK, nobody knew who she was. And then she came in and she made a name for herself by giving a lot of media talks, by promising a lot, especially her promises at the beginning, for example, getting more students into education, more students from deprived background into education. So I think anyone who is going to be the First Minister now, and if they're charismatic, if they know how to deal with the media, they're going to get a lot of attention, and then we will know who they are, just like Nicola Sturgeon before 2014.
Yeah, but you mentioned earlier, in the context of being a refugee choosing to go to Scotland, there was an element of compassion that she brought, wasn't there, to all of her politics, which, perhaps was fresh.
She seemed she's in touch with the people, from my perspective, the way I see it. Like Rishi Sunak, the way his government talks about refugees and small boats arriving in the UK, invasion, I feel like, hey, I didn't do that. I pay my taxes. I don't do that. We are refugees. We're hardworking people. We pay our taxes. But a lot of refugees, go to Canada, for example, go to Scotland because of what they see from a leader. Justin Trudeau, he seems very nice to refugees, welcoming refugees. He took off his jacket and gave it to one of them. Nicola Sturgeon policies and saying that Scotland is welcoming. Scotland is welcome. People are welcome here.
On this compassion question, I think it's really interesting if we also think about the gender recognition reforms that she was trying to bring in really at the end of her premiership. And some people were saying that this was the final straw for her to decide that politics was enough. And because, when she was trying to push all of those rules through, to some people that is a compassionate thing to do. I mean, it's increasing trans rights, it's bolstering them. And as Abdul says, rhetoric matters. And it's just signaling to certain people in the queer community that it is okay to be trans. At the same time, I think that is also where she overreached. So with the gender recognition bill, this idea that you could self-identify as another gender with only 6 months of living in that gender and no doctor's note at all and no medical transitioning at all. I think for a lot of people in the SNP, such as those supporting Kate Forbes now, that just wasn't what they were in the SNP for. That is just not what they voted Nicola Sturgeon in for. And so I think that really split Scotland as well. She almost tried to make the SNP into this kind of green progressive party. And actually, what unites the SNP is a very broad party. What unites them is this promotion for independence, not all of these social policies. And I think it's really, really interesting that 1 week where she was promoting the gender recognition reform, there was that born as male prisoner in a female prison in the exact same week. And you can just see the kind of knots that she got herself tied into. And then a few weeks later, she resigned. So I think it's fascinating that whether or not she overreached almost in this idea that she was a compassionate leader, because actually she didn't bring her supporters with her.
She also holds, any First Minister of Scotland, Leaf, holds a peculiar position in power in that you've got a lot of rights, but you can't control everything due to the UK government. How do you think she's managed that relationship with Westminster?
I think she's been pretty good with it. Her critics would say that it's kind of the dreamy situation to be in, for you to be the kind of head of the party that's calling for independence, but that doesn't have it, because you have a kind of a scapegoat. It's a bit like the way that the SNP has talked about Westminster reminds me a bit of how the Conservative Party used to talk about Brussels as the sort of bogeyman, the kind of, the rock around all of our necks, blah, blah, blah. And so you do kind of wonder how the SNP would actually deal with the pressures of like leading the country if they did actually win a referendum on independence. But of course, she has often looked so much more sane, measured, collected than the sort of leaders that have actually been in charge in Westminster. She's been a kind of model of a kind of very polished bon mot, and is very good on TV, good in interviews. It was only kind of in her last weeks where she was getting visibly rattled that people were starting to sort of say, oh, actually, the game's probably up. So I think she will remain for basically, all women in all parties, a bit of a kind of, maybe not someone that they personally look up to, but an example of how to perform well in politics.
Yes, and if we are going to predict that the SNP vote share goes down because, she was part of the reason people were voting for them, Cindy, just finally a bit of crystal ball gazing on this, where does that vote go? Because, you'd think most existing SNP voters would switch to Labour, but it's the Conservatives that are the second biggest party now.
Mm-hmm. I think it would go to both. As in, I'm not saying that there'll be an even split at all, but I think in the polls we have seen that both parties have benefited from Nicola Sturgeon stepping down. The Conservatives don't have Boris Johnson in leadership anymore, and he was absolutely kryptonite for a lot of Scots people. So Rishi Sunak is seen as slightly more palatable, and obviously he was a face that people saw during the pandemic and during the furlough, and he was actually for once some time the most popular politician in the UK. On the Labour side, you're right that it's more naturally aligned with the SNP, and under Anna Sarwar, they have a very, very charismatic local leader in Scotland. So I think both parties stand to gain there, really, and it would be all to play for, because it would be very exciting. In the last, ever since Nicola Sturgeon has been in government, but particularly since 2019, Scottish politics has been so dominated by the SNP. There's going to be a vacuum now.
Yes. Okay. Interesting. Lots of really important things have been achieved today. I'm sure Nicola Sturgeon would agree. On which note, I say thank you to Leaf, Abdul and Cindy. That's it for this week. You can follow the show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tapping follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription. Just go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Harriet Wells at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.